Hi, this is Lisa, and you are listening to I Love That Movie. This podcast is for movie lovers. It's not an unbiased opinion, it's not a straightforward review, it's just a couple people talking about a movie that they love. The format is each week I have a guest, and that guest and I discuss a movie that they love, something they're obsessed with, something they connect with. We'll talk about the plot, the director, and the actors, but we'll also talk about the personal connection my guest has with that movie. So if that sounds like something you want to listen to, keep listening. Adding a disclaimer to this episode because you may hear the pitter-patter of little feet running around. This is my new dog, Peaches. Normally Nick entertains her, but I happened to record at a time Nick was not home, and so you will hear her running around a little bit in the background. I took out as much as I could. I'm sorry about that. Going forward, you probably will not hear that because I'll probably just wait to record till he comes home. But anyway, wanted to add that. The rest of the episode is great. Enjoy. Hey, this is Lisa, and if you want to catch up with me on Twitter, you can find me at ILTM Podcast. You can also find me at I Love That Movie Podcast, and we have a Patreon. If you want to support us on there, you can. The show is always free, but we do have a bonus episode where right now we're covering WandaVision, and recently we covered all of The Mandalorian with guests, so just some extra content on there. And I want to take a moment to thank my top patrons, and they are Chris Balga, Michael Cross, Philip Barker, and Ricardo Alvarez. Thank you so much for keeping the lights on. And if you like what you heard today, please subscribe and rate the show. It does help new listeners find us. And lastly, I do want to mention that we do have a website as well, ilovethatmoviepodcast.com. And I have a returning guest with me here today. Hey, Thomas, how are you doing? Thank you so much for coming on.
Hey Lisa, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So I always have the guests pick the movie that they love. So what movie did you choose to talk about today?
I chose The Hunt for the Wilderpeople, which is a Taika Waititi film. Came out about 5 years ago, I think now, but yes, that's the one I picked.
Awesome. Yes, Hunt for the Wilderpeople came out in 2016. Did you see this movie in theaters?
I did, and it was, I live in Arizona, and so this was, it was one of those like limited release things over here in the United States, and I remember the only reason I went to go see it is because they had announced that he was doing the new Thor, Thor Ragnarok, and so I hadn't heard of him before that, and so I was
Oh.
excited to kind of check out his work. Whenever these directors that aren't quite as big, they come on to these like superhero projects or something like that. I always kind of like to at least see some of their stuff before I see their big movies. And I've become a huge Taika Waititi fan ever since. He's kind of like anything he does, I'm there for.
Oh, great. Yeah. So I think back when this came out in 2016, I don't think I was aware that Taika Waititi was directing Thor. I don't know if I was like a big fan back then. I think the first thing that I ever saw that he made was actually What We Do in the Shadows.
Oh yeah.
And I think I might have watched that specifically for this show. So I think like before that, I don't think I had like a big awareness of who he was.
Okay.
Um, but I really liked that film. I thought it was super funny, and I
Yeah.
very much enjoyed Thor Ragnarok. And I was like, oh, okay, this is like connected to that, and I think he's a great director. And then I went back and started to look for more of his work, and I think that's when I saw Hunt for the Wilderpeople.
Oh,
And I really, so it's probably the second or third of his films that I saw, but I definitely felt like, I really enjoyed What We Do in the Shadows, and this one is equally funny, but it's got a lot more emotional beats in this one than that first film. So it's definitely, I think I've kind of come full circle. I've become a big Taika fan.
yeah. Yeah, he's got such a unique style, unique voice, and I think I mean, he won an Oscar last year, which was so
Yeah.
cool. I was so excited for him that he was able to have that achievement, and recognition. And I think it's, yeah, this I don't always see a lot of the like limited release independent films. I mean, I like them. I just don't get to the movies as much as I'd like. But for some reason, I made an effort to see this one, and I really had no idea what it was about, and I'm really glad I did. And it's yeah. Anyways, it's just such a fun movie. So he's got such a cool style that I'm just so excited to see more of what he does going forward. So
Agreed. And I kind of skipped over this a little bit in the beginning, but you've actually come on the show a few times, and a lot of the films that you've chosen are like, Inception or what are some of the other episodes that we've done
we
together?
did. Let's see. We did Star Wars: The Last Jedi, which was
That's
fun.
right. Okay, I was like, I felt like there was a Star
And
Wars
then
one in
I
there.
think we
Yeah,
did
there's
one
been a
other
few.
one. I think we did Back to the Future too.
Back to the Future, yeah. So
Yeah.
like kind of bigger Hollywood films
Right.
have been your episodes, and you have a superhero show as well.
Uh-huh.
And so, yeah, a lot of the stuff that we've covered is kind of more of those bigger projects. But it's interesting sometimes when they pull in directors like Taika, it actually did, spark your interest in going back and seeing or watching a project of his that was like a little bit more independent. And back to what you were saying a moment ago, yeah, a lot of times when you've been on the show, we've talked about, like you said, Inception, Back to the Future, kind of bigger Hollywood sort of budget films that I also love. But it is kind of interesting that they picked Taika, and so that kind of made you want to like look into him, and then you end up watching kind of like a smaller independent film. And when I saw this movie, I thought, I'm so glad that there's still a space for films like this, that
Yeah.
have like these really character driven stories, or not necessarily huge budget, but lots of heart. You can just see all the potential, that Disney saw in him when they chose him for Thor.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, and I'm really glad that he, after doing Thor Ragnarok, his next thing was Jojo Rabbit, which is like a smaller
Yes.
movie as well, and like a more intimate film. It's not, this huge superhero film, which I love those, but like it's. I hope that because he's doing the next Thor again. I hope he can. It'd be kind of cool if he could switch off like that. I'd love to still see him do these smaller movies, but so yeah. Anyways, it's. I'm really glad that this. Um, I don't know if it was this film they caught their eye or what, but this is probably my favorite of his. I've loved everything he's done, but this is probably my favorite one so far. So
I think it might be mine too. Jojo Rabbit, there's no way he would have made that had he not made Thor, I think. I mean, it's like
yeah,
he sort of earned the street cred to be able to do whatever he wanted, and
totally.
a lot of filmmakers do that where they have like a dream project, but they got to make, the money first and get the notoriety first.
Mhm.
But out of all his films, which I enjoy all of them, I do think that I agree with you. I think Hunt for the Wilderpeople is the one that I connected with probably the most.
Yeah.
And with that said, we are not a spoiler free podcast, so I would encourage anybody that hasn't seen this movie yet, first of all, go see it. I think it was on Amazon Prime, is that right? I just saw it
Uh,
the other day, and I don't think I had to rent it.
yeah, it could be. I own it, so I know it was on Hulu at one point too. But yeah,
Yeah,
it's. I mean, if you have to rent it, it's worth it too. So yeah,
agreed.
that's
Yeah.
it.
And I have a really fast synopsis. It's literally one sentence because it's not like a super complicated plot. But
Right.
basically, a national manhunt is ordered for a rebellious kid and his foster uncle who go missing in the wild New Zealand bush. And this particular movie was based on a book called Wild Park and Watercress by the author Barry Crump. Have you heard of that book or seen it?
I have not. No, I still have never read it, but yeah, I don't know much about it, but
Yeah, me neither. I was surprised to see that it was based on a book. I would
yeah,
be interested to read it, but it just, I guess, like kind of knowing some of Taika's background, it just felt so tied to him. I kind of assumed it was like his idea.
yeah.
But definitely, I would be interested in reading that. One of the other notes that I had, and probably one of my favorite scenes from the movie, was that the Ricky Baker Happy Birthday song was created especially for the film because the filmmakers did not have the rights to use the traditional Happy Birthday song.
Yeah. I know, I
But
love
it,
that. I love the creativity with that. It's so funny.
yeah, that's one of my favorite parts of the movie is that little
Yeah.
song.
And on the
Oh, go
soundtrack,
ahead.
I don't know if you've ever listened to it. There's like a full version of it, with
Oh,
like
really?
instruments and stuff. That's pretty awesome. So I've jammed out to that quite a few times. So it's
That's great. I have to go look that up.
fun.
The last thing that I had was that this is the fourth film directed by Taika to premiere at Sundance. So he had after Eagle versus Shark in 2007, he did a film called Boy in 2010, and then of course like the biggest one, probably the biggest film that a lot of us would know would be What We Do in the Shadows in 2014, and they've all had critical acclaim. So it's kind of like a slow build to us. He kind of flew in on the scene, but obviously he had been around for a while.
Yeah, that's cool. I didn't realize he had premiered all those other ones there too. So um, and while you were, I looked up. You can actually stream this on Netflix and Hulu. It's on both right now. I just
Oh, perfect.
yeah. Um, one kind of interesting tidbit that I was reading about, because there's not a ton out there for this movie, as much as I was
There's
hoping.
not. Yeah.
But, one of my favorite scenes, and I probably my favorite scene in the movie is the funeral scene,
Yes.
uh, and that's Taika Waititi is the priest there. It's just oh my gosh, it's so hilarious. But I guess he based that off like an experience he had.
Oh,
Um,
really?
yeah, and I don't know. It didn't go into like this was just on IMDb, so I don't know how accurate it is. But
Oh, yeah. Sometimes it's real, sometimes it's not. But
right,
regardless, I get most of my facts from there anyway.
yeah, same.
We all trust it anyway.
So if so, I mean, that's pretty hilarious. But yeah, that scene is just I think it's so funny and like totally nails like his style, his humor. I think my favorite part of that is like when Ricky Baker's like when he's like, "What's behind that door?" and he's like, "Vegetables," and he's like, "No, not vegetables." Like all just disgusted that he would say that. Like, oh man, his comedic timing is just man, I love it. It's perfect.
I completely agree. I think Taika does a really good job of touching on things that are like, well, he'll give you like a really big emotional beat and then sort of rescue you a little bit right afterward,
Yeah.
with a little bit of humor. But it's so well placed because it's like it touches on the awkwardness of I think certain life events, like when there is a death and when you go to the funeral. There's all these little like unsaid, I think, awkward things
Hmm.
that happen, and he does a good job of like turning that into humor that you can kind of relate to.
Totally. And it's not like it's situational humor, I feel
Hmm.
like, where like you go into this like awkward church building and it just looks like this old building and I'm sure we've all been to those before that they're not the most comfortable or like whatever, I mean it's a funeral too, so you're not usually those aren't always the happiest times and but he just has this really weird quirky priest that probably is the only guy in the town that like he's like I guess I'll be the priest and maybe doesn't have I don't know and it's just that situational humor I really like especially coming after the scene we have right before it is I think it's very yeah it's very needed in that moment because it's when we sorry I don't know if you I'm jumping ahead a little bit but
Oh no, you're fine.
when Bella dies that scene is just kind of comes out of nowhere and I remember the first time seeing it, like holding back tears because I was just like, "Oh my gosh, she's dead!" Like they just, and because she puts, I don't remember the actress's name, I'm blanking her name, but she has such a heartwarming performance where she's just like this really just soft, warm-hearted person that Ricky Baker like finally, it's like finally someone that cares about him and she just kind of loves him and accepts him exactly for who he is, and then to lose that is like it's I don't know, it's really emotional, and then you go into the scene that's like kind of eases some of that tension, so it's not quite it's not quite as heavy, but which I thought was really well done.
Yeah, I think with Ricky, we're introduced to him uh, as a bad egg, as I think her name is Paula in the movie. I think
Yeah.
Rachel House would say, but he's sort of a kid that's had to move around to a lot of different homes. He's got a little bit of a rebellious nature, a thick skin, and he doesn't act super excited when he comes home with her. When he's introduced to her and to Sam Neill's character, and it takes a long time for her to crack his shell. Like there's several different scenes of her trying to connect with him until finally they start to kind of function as a little family, and that's when she dies. And
Yeah.
you're right, it just comes out of nowhere. And even though Rachel was only in a few scenes, I don't know, you just kind of took for granted that she would always be there. It just felt like, okay, this movie's going to be about her and him and their connection, and then maybe they'll like loop Sam Neill, at some point. But instead it's like the opposite of that. She passes away quickly, but she was the one that actually adopted Ricky. And so now, the state is basically like, well, we got to take him back and find him a new home again. And I think for the first time in Ricky's life, he felt truly accepted, and he doesn't want to leave, which is really funny because Sam Neill's character is less receptive to keeping him there.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like seeing we get the intro to Ricky Baker, and yeah, like you said, pause, the way she describes him, it's like, she just goes down and lists all these things he does, and when you stop and look at it, it's like, I mean, I guess a lot of that stuff is just stuff that most teenage boys do.
Yeah, it's kind of like, and also a little bit of a cry for help. I mean, he needs attention, and he needs
Well,
someone to spend a lot of time with him, but it's sort of being interpreted as he's a bad kid.
right. Yeah, exactly. And I think it's like, you know, I think kind of one of the like themes of this film is like, because even Hector, his uncle, Sam Neill's character, like he describes himself as like, kind of like a wayward soul in a sense where, his wife kind of sees him and takes him in, and she takes in Ricky, and she's taking in these people that no one else wants, and I think Ricky kind of fits that too. He's this kid that like, it doesn't seem like he's probably a troublemaker, but he's not like doing anything super outrageous. And he finally finds a home, and then he loses like that one person that like really sees him and cares about him. And I love to like, excuse me, how when at the very beginning when he first gets there, he tries to run away, and he doesn't get very far. And she's
Yeah.
like, he like wakes up, and she's just sitting out there, and he's like, she's kind of like, well, you're welcome to run away, but you want to come have some breakfast first? And he's just like, oh, okay. And then like, it just reminded me when I was a kid. I remember like I wanted to run away one time. I was much younger, but I remember like telling my mom I was gonna run away to my friend's house, and so I remember she helped me like pack a bag and put some food in there. And I remember I went to my friends, and his mom came out, and she's like, so you're welcome to come here, but we've got this, and this going on tonight, and so you're probably like, you'll need to come back a little bit later. So I don't know if you want to go to the park. They were like both in on it, and I was just like, yeah, I think I'll just go home. Actually, I think my bed sounds kind of nice. Um, anyway, so like I relate to that moment. But then I love too later on, like once he's really settled, she's like, so you gonna run away again tonight? And he's like, nah, I'll probably stay here. Like, just, I don't know, I just love how she's kind of like, if that's what you want to do, then go for it, but we're here. And he's probably
Yeah.
never had anything like that, where anytime he tries to do something like that's, like bad, I guess, what quote bad or whatever, like he is treated with like a ton of like disciplinary action or whatever, just anger, frustration. And so I don't know, it's kind of cool to see how she was able to connect with him so quickly and just kind of let him be who he was and what he wanted to do.
Yeah,
Uh,
he tests his boundaries. I think he's sort of testing to see like, if I push you really hard, that's when you're going to give up. It's like, it's almost like he subconsciously kind of sabotages himself, and he's
yeah,
probably done that repeatedly at every home he's been in, but it's because he's hurting. And she's, really intuitive and picks up on that, probably because she's been through that. Because later we find out, she keeps talking about where she's from and where she'd want her ashes, I think, to be. She mentioned
yeah,
her home. And then Ricky brings it up like, hey, we need to take her ashes there. And he's like, oh, she made that up. She
yeah,
doesn't know where she came from, and she didn't have any family. And that's like a really big aha moment for Ricky, that she was trying so hard to create a home for him because she didn't have one. And yeah, the same thing for Sam Neill's character. He's like almost like a loner, what would you call that here in America? Like a hill person? I don't know. Like
yeah,
a hermit, like he you find out later in the movie that he's illiterate, that he kind of lives off the land, and that's how he wants to be, and he doesn't like to be around people for whatever reason. And so she was one of the few people that could reach him and had a good relationship with him. And
Right.
then she was kind of doing that with Ricky, and now she's gone, and they've kind of got to navigate this new world without her. How do they create these relationships with other people? And it turns into this whole adventure where everyone thinks that Ricky's been kidnapped by this hermit. But it definitely makes for good situational comedy, but it's also pretty touching.
Right. And I really like how, like, just how kind of their adventure starts, I guess. It's kind of like Ricky's just kind of like he's done. He's not he's like, I'm not going back to child welfare. And he tries to like pretend like he commits suicide.
Oh yeah,
And I love his little
to
note he
throw him off this
writes.
trail.
Yeah. Um, and and then you find them out. Yeah, you get them out in like the bush. But I think it's interesting because yeah, like Sam Neill's character Hector, he basically tells Ricky, he's like, yeah, I'm just gonna go bush, gonna go live out there for a while. And it's like, I think it's sad that he, like, his wife Bella was like his one, that was his home, like she was his home.
Yeah,
He's
his one
never really,
human connection.
right. um, and he kind of has to like learn to find that for himself outside of her, within himself. I
Hmm.
think that's kind of like a cool journey that he goes on in this movie. Because like, and it's interesting once again, like this situational humor. He breaks his ankle and he's stuck out there with Ricky, for I think they say they're out there for 6 weeks before they like come back in. Like they come back.
Yeah, they become national news, and
Yeah.
there's this big manhunt to try to find this little boy. And Rachel's character is very much, I mean, it's like she thinks she's in the FBI. There's points in the movie where they're like, you're not a cop, and we don't say that over here.
Yeah.
She takes her job a little too seriously. No Child Left Behind. Um, which I feel like her character has her heart in the right place for sure. I think she does care about children, but she's just a little too by the book. And I don't know, it seems like sort of a soft commentary on the system a little bit, where it's kind of like, it's definitely got a lot of flaws and everything like that, and maybe there's a better way to handle some of these situations, but at the same time acknowledging that they're people too. She's one of my favorite characters in the film, and I can see why she made it into Thor Ragnarok. I really appreciated her in that movie too.
Yeah. Yeah, she's and I don't know if you did you see Soul, the new
Oh yeah,
Pixar.
I did. I didn't realize she was in that.
She voices the counter person, the person that counts the souls. Anyways.
Oh yeah, you know what? Yeah, there were two. Was also what's his name? Darcy in it as well. Um, because I thought I heard two voices that I
Oh,
recognized.
okay. Yeah.
Um, Reese Darby, Darcy. I don't know
Oh,
why I
yeah.
said
Okay.
Darby. I meant
Reese
Darby, but
Darby. Yeah.
yeah, wasn't he in Soul too? I feel like I
I don't
heard
know.
his
He could have been.
voice.
He could have been. Yeah.
There were like two New Zealand voices,
Yeah. I
but
know she was because I remember I'm like, "Okay, that voice sounds so familiar," and I looked that one up, but I don't know if he could have been in it too. Um, but
it
yeah,
could have
no,
just been Taika
she's
actually, but I'm not sure.
yeah. Um, she's great. And I love like when she's like on the news and she's just like, "No child left behind. No child left behind."
Yeah,
They're
it's
just
like
kind of like, okay, all right, like, but
she's
I
very
think
single-minded.
yeah, I think though, like, I think there is maybe a bit of a commentary there about because, um, you, like here in, I think it's across the United States. I know here in Arizona it's called DCS, Department of Child Services. They changed that from CPS a couple years ago, and I used to do a lot of work with people within that organization, and it's not the most well funded. It's not the most well, you're not paid well to do those types of jobs, um, but it's a really important and critical job. In this movie, it's like I think she has some of the best like moments in the movie too. And then the police officer Andy, like her partner, I think he's hilarious too.
Oh
Uh,
yeah, yeah.
one of
That
my
she's
favorite.
always like yelling at. He's like kind of misty-eyed sometimes.
Yeah, one of my favorite ones when he's like, "There's a $10,000 ward, dead or alive." He's like, "Oh wait, no, sorry, alive. We need him alive."
Dead or alive.
But
Yeah. Oh, and I think no, he was. Yeah, I know who you're talking about. There was also a guy that she yells at one point in the film, and he gets kind of a little misty-eyed when she screams at him.
oh
I
yeah,
can't remember the name of that guy. He was like a real small guy. But yeah, yeah, it's like her heart is in the right place. The funding is not there. The training possibly is also not there.
yeah,
But you like her. You don't hate her in the movie.
yeah.
Yeah, and I actually recommended this film to my dad the other day when we were covering it. I was like, I just told him because I watched it. I said, you know who else would like this movie? I bet my dad would like this movie. So I encouraged him to watch it, and he loved it. Although he was totally shocked, he did not realize that was Sam Neill.
Oh really?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
had to be like, it's Sam Neill, and he's like, he was kind of like, who? And I'm like, the guy from Jurassic Park, and he was like, no. I'm like, yes. No, wait, this guy from Jurassic Park? Yes, that guy. Let me go look it up. I was like, okay. And he was like, whoa, I watched that whole movie. He's so different. I'm like, oh yeah, he's older now.
Yeah.
But yeah, he is kind of playing a different character than I think we're used to seeing him in. Like, when I think of Sam Neill, I think of him as like, I don't know, like handsome and dashing and not necessarily a hermit.
Totally. I'm trying to like, I know I've seen him in a lot of stuff, but Jurassic Park's like the biggest one that comes to mind. Like
Same.
Dr. Grant, and I, I I know he's in other things. I can't think of anything off the top of my head. But yeah, he's this more gruff. He's got the big beard, so he kind of looks different as well. And I think he's a natural. I think he's from New Zealand as well. Maybe I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong
Yeah,
there.
either New Zealand or Australian, but I thought about it and I was like, actually, yeah, I think he is. Oh, no, you know what? It says born in Omagh. Is this saying Colorado?
Oh, okay.
Let's see. But he did move to New Zealand in
Okay.
1954. So that's probably why we think that.
So maybe he
Born
grew.
in, oh, it looks like he was born in Northern Ireland and then moved to New
Okay.
Zealand. Okay, there we go. Yeah, it's like when I think of him, I do think of him as like international because I mean he has an accent. Um, Although I don't know if in Jurassic Park you were supposed to think he was British. I can't remember, but
Yeah, I can't.
yeah,
Yeah. But
it's
yeah,
like he has like a slight accent, not like a really thick one.
yeah. Well, yeah, it looks like he grew up there. Like he went to college and everything in New
Yeah,
Zealand. So yeah, I guess he's probably
he probably considers himself a New Zealander.
yeah. Which I like about this movie too is that everyone, the whole cast is from New Zealand, and I think it's the whole crew and everyone is from New Zealand. And I actually lived in Australia for a few years when I first graduated high school, and
Oh, cool.
there's a lot of New Zealanders over there too, because it's pretty easy, I think, to travel between the two. Um, and so, I got pretty good about like picking up the Australian accent versus like a New Zealand accent, and
Mm-hmm.
a lot of the slang and stuff that it's in this movie is stuff that I'd heard when I lived over there. And so I remember when I saw it for the first time, that was also something that I really loved about this movie was like it just kind of took me back to some of the experiences, some of the people I met, and especially like at when Ricky Baker calls themselves the Skucks, like that that word was something that I heard over there, and I remember coming back here, and it's like I said it one time, and someone looked at me like, what is the Skucks? And I'm like, oh, yeah, I guess that's it. So it was fun to hear that over there and kind of like have it reintegrated, I guess, somewhat into American culture. Not that this movie's a huge American movie, but I have more people now that can actually get what that means, and so it's anyways, there's I really loved just kind of feeling a little bit immersed in like that culture a little bit more in this film. And I thought that was a really cool part of this movie is that it feels like you're part of that. They're not trying to bring in the American actors to portray people, like it's everyone's from there, and it feels very authentic to that experience.
Yeah, I think, there's a lot of different cultures that we don't always get exposed to in America, and I don't think that we have like a great sense of what New Zealand is like, who lives there, how it's more diverse than probably what we picture. And Taika being half Maori, he was able to sort of bring that aspect of his, background into this film. And so, like the main character is Maori as well. And that's, the indigenous people in New Zealand. And I don't think that a lot of us over here have like an awareness of that. And so like in some ways the film is sort of bringing, that diversity into, into American cinema. Ricky has, the actor that plays Ricky has had roles after this. And so has, the actress that plays, Paula. But also, sort of subtle social commentary about what's happening over there, because you notice like it does seem like some of the kids in the system tend to be like Ricky, right? And then later when he stops like at a house with some other indigenous kids that I think like it seems like they're from the same background, and later they're the people he ends up with in the movie. But it's like he's kind of subtly pushing some of that into the film, but it's not like very overt. It's just kind of lightly touched on.
Yeah, totally. And I really love the little family he meets.
Yeah, that
like
girl with the horse.
yeah. And it's cool that he kind of ends up with them. And like that, the dad, when he meets Ricky Baker and he's just like, oh my gosh, it's Ricky Baker. And, he takes selfies with them. And,
Yeah.
you'd think like, I think you'd probably want to, I don't know, call someone and be like, hey, this kid's in my house. But like that type of personality, that really warm and inviting and like, just like kind of building you up type thing that he does to Ricky Baker, like makes him, I don't know, like to me, it seemed like he was like making him feel good about himself. That was kind of what I experienced a little bit too from a lot of people that I met that were from New Zealand like that. And so
They're kind of like very
cool to see a
friendly.
picture there. Huh?
Oh, interesting. Like you were saying, like they're very friendly, and that seemed to kind of check out with your experience
Yeah.
with them. That's cool. Yeah, kind of like Southern Hospitality, the New Zealand version.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and
we
the
talked
dad
about
seemed
the All
young.
Blacks rugby team.
Oh
you know,
yeah.
and that's like that was the thing that I experienced a lot, was like, because the Australia, they have their own rugby team, but the All Blacks are, from what I understand, are like usually the better team, most, and a lot of there's a lot of pride behind that. And so it was like just like those little things that those little subtle things that they throw in there. Like to me, having experienced some of that, it was really cool to kind of like just brought me back to my own experiences of meeting some of these people. So it was really cool to kind of see it depicted in this movie.
Yeah, again, it's like not something that we get to see a whole lot. I think it's like our idea over here of New Zealand and Australia is probably more like a cartoonish version of it.
Definitely.
And this is kind of more like a nuanced, learning, like you said, some of the slang and just culturally, seeing some of that portrayed a little bit more authentically for sure.
Right.
Yeah. We haven't talked about when they run into what's his name? I'm looking for his name here. Psycho Sam.
Like Sam.
Yeah, I want to talk about Psycho Sam because we've got, Reese in this one who we see him quite a bit, right? He was in What We Do in the Shadows, Flight of the Conchords,
Yeah.
Quite a few projects. I think wasn't he in Voltron too? That was him, right?
I think so. Yeah. I didn't
Yeah.
ever see that, but I think he's.
Or am I thinking of another actor? I think it was him, but I'm not sure.
I think he is, because I follow. I haven't seen that, but I follow Reese Darby on Instagram, and I'm pretty sure I remember him posting about it. But he was also in the Jumanji movies.
Oh yeah, you're right.
Yeah, and then and he's been in a lot of stuff. I think first saw him in Flight of the Conchords. I don't know, maybe 10, 15 years ago, whenever that kind of first came out in DVD. I remember my older brother had it, and he came home from college right after I graduated high school, and we watched a lot of that, I remember. And he was my favorite of that show. He was so funny.
Yeah, he was Murray, right?
Murray, yeah.
Yeah. My first exposure to Reese is definitely as Murray, but yeah, he was in Voltron. He was. He's just, it's just his voice. He's Koran, but he sounds the same. Um, but
Yeah.
yeah, he's really good in that show. He's good in everything. I think the first time I saw him like outside of that show was probably what was that Peter Jackson movie called? Section something 31 or something like that. The one with the aliens that are like little, they kind of look like bugs. My
Uh,
gosh, I'm describing this so poorly.
I don't know. I don't know if I've seen that one.
You have, I promise. I'm just explaining it terribly. I'll come back to it when I remember what it was
Okay.
called. But yeah, I always enjoy him, and of course, he's in What We Do in the Shadows. What We Do in the Shadows, werewolves, not swearwolves. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah, I really enjoy that.
Yeah, he's so good, and I would love to see him in more stuff. I guess he's in a decent amount of things, but um like, but I love though in this movie, like he plays like a, because he kind of always plays like similar characters, I would say, but this is like a
Hmm.
different variation of that. This like conspiracy theory guy that just lives out in the woods. And I love like when they meet him, he's like he's like, "Have you guys heard of this guy that lives out in the woods?" And they're just like, "No." And he's like, "Oh, okay." Like he thinks he's more like he's this urban legend, and he's not really. He's just I don't know, just a lot of his humor is really great. And I like when he's like, "Oh, I have these secret tunnels under my house." Then he's like, "Oh wait, I forgot to build it."
Yeah,
Uh,
his scene is pretty great. It's kind of like a scene too. I feel like where they're definitely Ricky and especially Sam Neill's character is like a little strange, a little out there, but then they meet somebody who is truly like quote unquote of the bush, I guess,
yeah,
like a little bit more out there.
right. Yeah, no, he's awesome. And I think like um also I was reading too that his car, Crumpy, um they
Grumpy.
that's actually the author of the book that it's based on. That's his last name.
Oh yeah, that makes sense. Oh, by the way, the movie I was thinking of is District 9, and
Oh,
it's
okay.
not him. It's another actor that's South African that just
Got
for whatever reason reminded me of him, I guess, and so I just in my mind invented that it was him, but it's not.
Yeah, I know who you're talking about. The actor.
Yeah,
He's
that
in a
plays
lot of
Wickus. Yeah.
uh, yeah, he's in a lot of Neil, what is that guy's name? The director of District 9. I can't remember his last name. Anyways, but
This is
um
great movie trivia. I can't remember
yeah.
anything. Neil Blomkamp.
Yes, that's right.
Yes.
Okay.
So Peter Jackson produced that movie, and then this guy directed it, and
Right.
then yeah, that's so my mind was making a lot of leaps, but there's a
Yeah.
really tenuous connection.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, but no, I enjoy him in everything he's in, and again, even when he has like a really small part, like in this one, he always just does such a good job with it.
Totally. Yeah, he is. He's awesome. Um and I love to like just some of the like kind of going back like to some of the like situational humor and different things, like when they first find out that they're like fugitives or whatever, and Ricky Baker's like reading the paper, and he's like he's like Caucasian male, and he's like, well, they definitely got that one wrong because you're definitely white. Like, I don't know, just some of those moments, those that humor is like I love, it's so funny. But
I really love the scene where he makes fun of him for not being able to read, and he's like, "I can't read, I'm dumb," or something like that, and it makes Sam Neill so angry he like runs over, and that's how he breaks his
yeah.
foot. I don't know why, but that just it makes me laugh so hard every time.
Totally.
Ricky's like front that he kind of puts on and persona, his gangster persona, is so funny because you just remember being a kid and like
Totally.
trying to be tough and cool, and he just nails that so well. It's funny that like no matter what era we're in, that is always kind of consistently the same.
Yeah, it is. It totally is. And it's interesting too because I used to, like I was saying before, I used to do some work in group homes and different things like that. And that is very consistent. You go into a lot of group homes, and that's pretty like much, not everyone obviously, but that type of like wanting to be like a gangster, kind of that mentality is there. Because I think though, if you think about a lot of these kids, they don't think they're gonna end up in like with a house, a home, or a family, and so it's like, well, what else is there for them?
Right. They
Um,
they kind of rely on like outwardly portraying a tough shell because, they've only got themselves to depend on. It's like
right.
it's funny and it's cute, but underneath it you're kind of like, concerned for them. And
Totally.
Ricky, luckily he gets rescued in the end by that family, and I love that he gets Sam Neill back. I have to think that there was a trial and everything, and they
Right.
decided that, it was not accurate, but he still went to jail for technically kidnapping him. But I love, like, as soon as he's out, he's like, basically, I miss you.
Yeah.
And they make that deal where he gets to call him uncle and stuff. And I thought that was a really sweet way to like incorporate Sam Neill's character back into his life, because it's like, yeah, I think after there's a national manhunt, and no matter what the explanation is, he disobeyed the state for 6 weeks and disappeared. He probably can't adopt him, but at
Right.
least he gets to kind of be in his life. And Sam Neill's character, kind of like him, it's like he ends up in sort of a halfway house at the end,
Yeah.
and he was probably just going to end up being stuck and stay there because he's essentially homeless. So in a
Yeah.
lot of ways, he really is a lot like Ricky, and it's a better, situation if he comes with him, and that family takes him in too.
Yeah, and I think that works too because it's like I don't know if Sam Neill is able to like obviously he takes care of him in the bush or teaches him how to survive essentially, but I don't think it's like to live in a more domestic lifestyle. I don't know if that's the right thing, and so I feel like that I really like the way it ends too. I think it ends, the best for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Gives Sam Neill that opportunity to like still be out away from society in a rural area. And I think it's cool too that like it's more of this like friendship that they have now, um,
Yeah.
relationship, rather than like a father figure. But I do think it's cool. I noticed this time I was watching it like how much like Ricky's able to kind of like pick up on like these survival skills that
Yeah.
like he's the one that saves him from the giant boar that's going to attack them.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Um, but then at the same time, Ricky kind of teaches Hector like kind of how to process his feelings and emotions a little bit because Ricky comes in, he's like, "Oh, this counselor lady taught me this thing,"
Oh, yeah.
and you see this kid that's like been through like he's probably met with a lot of counselors over his lifetime. He's had case managers, he's had all these people that have been trying to help him, and it's kind of cool to see that at least some of that sticks because there's that part where he's like, yeah, you're still processing, like, and he's talking about his friend that died and how like that one took me forever to process, and he kind of like you see at the end of the haiku thing that he teaches, Hector, and like he does
Oh, yeah,
that.
his haikus. The way he processes his emotion through the haikus. I love that.
So it's kind of cool how they end up just becoming these like they teach each other these skills that the other was lacking. And I think that to me it's just kind of like, um, I don't know, sometimes there's people in our lives that we don't expect to gain anything from, but that can teach us things. And like if we allow ourselves to have those opportunities, like we can build these unique relationships, and really like where it becomes this thing where it's like a mutual thing where we can both learn and teach each other things. I think that was kind of cool how it was represented in this odd pairing of this teenage boy and this older guy that's kind of rough and around the edges. But
Yeah, it's surprising. Like the plot of the movie is very like it's kind of fun and silly and exciting, and there's a lot of humor, but there's so many moments in the film that are genuinely touching, like to where
yeah,
there's like you're misty eyed. It's incredible the way that I think Taika is able to do both of those things simultaneously to get like real emotions out of you. And yeah, I was even thinking this time that maybe Sam Neill's character, I mean, they don't say how old he is. I mean, he's older, but I was wondering if maybe he's getting towards like almost like retirement age too.
mm,
So he's almost more like a grandfather at that point.
yeah,
But and that's could be another reason why it's not only hard for him to integrate in society because he's not literate, but also just he's getting kind of too old. And so he can either like stay at that home that he's at and be sort of taken care of that way, or he can go with Ricky and sort of be kind of back in society. And I think that that's probably the healthier option for him. And it's also just, it's touching. Like, he feels really needed and wanted at the end, and you're just like full of warm fuzzies
Yeah.
for everyone at the end, despite the fact that there was, you know, kind of a tragedy early on in the film. And there's a lot of real moments like that, you know, when Ricky talks about his childhood. He even like drops a huge bomb at one point in the movie where he's like, yeah, my friend died. Right.
Yeah.
And he's like, well, what happened? He's like, I don't know, they just told me she died. I'm like, oh my god. And it's kind of like, it almost like he's not really old enough to like really process that yet. And it's
Yeah.
sort of played, I'm sorry, a little bit for humor, but you can tell like it's also this like softly introduce something a little bit deeper and darker. And but yet when you walk away from this movie, you don't feel like, oh, it's like a dark movie. Like, not at all. Like, it's a very happy movie with a lot of heart. It's just they inject some, you know, reality into it too.
Totally. Well, I think that's like what I don't know. That's like one of, to me, like one of Taika's really strong skill sets is he takes like
Yes.
heavy subject matter, and he can make it approachable and make it like something that is not. I don't think he treats it lightheartedly. I don't think, but like because he doesn't. I think he treats it as it is, but he's able to like do it with like, you know, like with humor, but also like with a lot of heart behind it, to where it just, I don't know, it's like this really compelling story that he's able to bring out, you know. And like you look at something like Jojo Rabbit, which is about, you know, World War II and Nazi Germany, and like he makes a movie that's like both funny but also sad and dramatic, and but also leaves you kind of like feeling somewhat inspired and somewhat hopeful. And I feel like he does
Mm-hmm.
that really well with this as well. Like he takes, because this is, you know, this is something that like, you know, thousands of, I don't know the numbers, but a lot of people deal with, like a lot of children are in the foster care system, or
Yeah.
they lose a parent or whatever. Like there's so many people out there, and we don't see this represented very much in film or media, like characters in these roles, or even someone like Hector, who, you know, we don't get a ton of his backstory, but we learn that, you know, he killed someone, which is, you know, pretty awful thing, and he didn't
Yeah.
do it maliciously, you know, from what we learn, but he still did, and he still paid those consequences. And how does someone like that, how do you go on with your life after that? Like how do you,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that the movie like shows this guy is like been discarded by society basically, and kind of left to like, you know, like he doesn't add value to anywhere, but then he's able to kind of have this second chance at this later
Yeah.
in his life, where he's able to connect with this kid, and then eventually ends up in a good spot. And I think Taika just does so good at like taking these difficult real world situations and making a really interesting story that's not only like brings awareness to a lot of these things, but also gives you some sort of like hope and inspiration from all of it, that even though we experience these terrible things, like we can still find some sort of, you know, be peace or hope through all these things, if that makes sense at all. But
Oh no, it does. Actually, that I hadn't thought about that with Sam Neill's character, but it's like, yeah, there's a cyclical nature to this whole, you know, in the system thing, right? Where it's like you kind of get the feeling that he's kind of like Ricky in the sense that he probably grew up with a pretty rocky start, and then he ended up committing a crime, or, you know, and then he ends up, like you said, being sort of discarded. I mean, that's kind of the direction Ricky was headed in, and the big catalyst of change was actually Bella for both of them. It's almost like saying, you know, if somebody can intervene and take someone's life in a different direction, they can have such a big impact on that person, and that, you know, people shouldn't be discarded. Yeah, I hadn't even thought of that, but I really like that. And I know that some of Taika's sort of critics, you know, I've seen people say like they didn't like Thor Ragnarok, it was too silly. And the biggest thing that I hear consistently is that the humor like undercuts the emotional impact of certain scenes. But I think it takes a lot of talent to do what Taika does, where it doesn't undercut it. To me, it adds layers to it. And I think life is complicated. Life can be simultaneously funny and sad and all those things. Yes, sometimes the humor is there to give us a break, but I think sometimes it's part of the scene because it's just like part of the moment and part of life. You can kind of have both. So I guess that brings me to my last couple of questions for you. Number one, why does this movie resonate with you so much? Why do you feel like it has rewatch value, and you keep coming back to it and have enjoyed it so much?
I mean, a lot of things we touched on, but I think I just really love that it's like this story about two people that essentially like, like we don't, like most people in society, we don't look upon those people as having value, like in our culture. Kind of viewed as like, oh, we have to help them, or we're the ones that have to extend ourselves to help these people. They're pulling us down, but in reality, like they're still people and they still have things to contribute. And I think this movie treats them like that. It treats them like real human beings, and yeah, they're flawed, and yeah, they make mistakes, but it's like it gives someone like that a stage or an opportunity to like show their worth, I guess. And I guess to me, I think for me, just even like for me personally, like knowing when I've made mistakes in my own life, and you feel that like guilt or shame that you carry, and like seeing characters like this, like I really love that, because it gives you, like, to me at least, it gives me a sense of like of motivation, or like hope that even when we screw up and we make mistakes, there's still people out there that will accept us, and that we can still recover from those things, that our life isn't over just because we made a mistake. And I think that's one thing that I really love about it. And then of course it's really funny.
That helps too.
Literally, like, it's hilarious. I've watched this movie a ton, and there's like a lot of different moments where I've just been almost crying because I'm laughing so hard. So it has all the things I love about a movie. It's like there's heartfelt emotion to it. It's funny. There's some fun, exciting action in it too, and so it's one that I just think is, and I think it's accessible to all ages. Like, it's pretty, you can show this to kids, to adults, and everyone can enjoy it. So I think it's one that hits all the buttons for me. So,
what is your pitch to someone that hasn't seen this movie before?
See, I've told a lot of people about this, because usually
Me too.
Have you heard of The Hunt for the Wilderpeople? People are like, no, I've never heard of it. I'm like, oh man, it's, I guess kind of the way I usually describe it is it's like this really funny, heartfelt, quirky, exciting movie. I guess that's kind of how I've described it. I know at times too, I've told people, like, it's kind of, because a lot of, and in my circle of friends and people, Napoleon Dynamite was huge when that came out.
Oh yeah,
like 15 years ago, whenever that was. I was in high school.
It was huge, yeah.
And so I've kind of used that for people like that have never heard of them. Like, so it's kind of like Napoleon Dynamite, except it's like got a lot more heart to it, and it's in New Zealand.
That's actually a really good comparison, because it's kind of quirky, like that film. I mean, it's probably before in the mainstream we saw stuff like a lot of Wes Anderson films and things like that. And I know people kind of compare Taika to Wes Anderson, but I think he's like a little bit more subtle than that movie, than his, not throwing any shade towards Wes Anderson. I love his films, but he's a little bit more subtle. And I think you're right. I think the humor is like akin a little bit more to something like Napoleon Dynamite. I like that. I'm going to use that.
Yeah. And Napoleon Dynamite's kind of about small town Idaho. It takes you to that, where this takes you to like New Zealand. And I think, but it's, to me though, where I think it's a better movie. Not, I still love Napoleon Dynamite, but like it just has a little bit more depth to it. And I think
for sure.
That's what makes it more than just like a 1 or 2 time viewing for me, where it's a movie that I like to go back and revisit a lot. So
completely agree. Well, Thomas, thank you so much for coming on today. Do you have anything you want to plug?
Yeah, I mean, if anyone wants to follow up and listen to my podcast, hear more of my thoughts, my podcast is called Supehero MovieCast, and we're pretty much wherever you listen to podcasts. So yeah, that's where you can find more of my stuff if you want to keep up with me.
Great. Well, thank you so much, and have a good one.
Yeah, you too. Thank you.